This episode is sponsored by Copilot. I'll talk about that later in the video. Hello, brains. Let's talk about patterns we learned in childhood and never unlearned as adults until we were 39 and finished with trauma therapy. So my brother and I were diagnosed with ADHD around the same time, and pretty sure my brother was diagnosed right away. On the other hand, when my mom asked my doctor about me, he asked how I had done in elementary school. My mom said she did great, she had great grades, and he said she can't have ADHD, she's too smart. So it took me a little bit longer to get diagnosed because my mom said, thank you for your opinion, I'd like to talk to a specialist. I was able to go and get diagnosed. And one of the reasons why some people do fly under the radar in terms of their ADHD diagnosis is because they have a more internalized presentation. Their symptoms aren't as externally obvious to other people, or maybe they're gifted, they did well at school. So it doesn't seem like they're struggling as much as somebody who's really getting into a lot of trouble at school and clearly struggling with their grades, that kind of thing. So this actually happens a lot. And what can happen in that case is that one might get a lot more attention and support for their struggles than the other one, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Part of it is that my brother was just so obviously more in need of support than I was. What ended up happening was even once I got my diagnosis, I was given medication and I was grateful for that. It did help a lot, but that was the only support that I was given. Whereas my brother had residential treatment programs and lots of therapists and just, went to a special school. Like, he had a lot of extra supports that I didn't have. And the message that I got was that his needs mattered and mine didn't. And the reason why I felt like mine didn't was because when he was struggling, when he was having a hard time, so much of my parents' attention went to him that I felt like there wasn't really a place for me to ask for help with my homework when my parents were dealing with my brother melting down. And this pattern continued later in my life. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, I felt like, how am I supposed to say I need help memorizing lines for an audition when my dad was just diagnosed with cancer? The needs that I have are just so, small, I guess, compared to the needs of my family. But what that taught me was that my needs were not as important as other people's. It became my norm. It's obviously not a healthy way to be in any relationship. I didn't know what healthy looked like. I didn't know what else to do because, I guess as a kid, you're taught to take your turn, right? And wait. And if it's somebody else's turn right now because they have a bigger need, then you wait your turn. But my turn often never came because their needs didn't change, right? They may have evolved or been different from one day to the next, but my brother was still going to be autistic and my dad was still going to have cancer. And these needs were long-term and chronic. And it wasn't a temporary thing of hey, he skinned his knee, let's get him a Band-Aid. It was long-term, chronic. His needs are bigger. I learned that my needs only mattered until somebody else was in the room that had more important needs than mine. The problem is that there's always going to be somebody with greater needs than you, always. And in some relationships, the other person's needs are going to be greater than yours in general because they've got a chronic condition that they're dealing with. I've been going through a lot of trauma therapy to kind of undo some of these patterns. And my therapist finally gave me a solution to this thing that I'd been struggling with my whole life, which is to be able to say to somebody, I believe that you have the greater need right now, and I don't want to neglect mine. So what should we do? Because my answer was always, I believe you have the greater need than mine, so I'm going to not have any. And that doesn't work. Having that language was really mind-blowing to me. So I wanted to share it with you in case it was helpful for you too, because I honestly did not know that that was an option. How can both get met? And I've found a few ways. One way is to recognize that the person that you're trying to get your needs met from might not be the person to be able to meet your needs right now, especially if they do have a bigger need. It might not be them, or at least not for everything. Sometimes it takes a lot out of somebody to be able to support you in the way that you need, and they don't have it to give. And so one of the things that I've learned to do is to recognize that I'm not a kid anymore. I don't have to wait for the adult in the room to have time for me. I don't have to wait for the adult in the room to recognize that I have needs and to decide that they're important. I am the adult in the room now. I get to decide that my needs are important, and that is not dictated by somebody else's capacity to meet them. My needs are important. And rather than thinking of it as an on-off switch of this person's needs are important or mine, sliders, okay, this person's needs are important, cool, maybe I'll dip mine down a little bit, but then maybe it balances back out later. Or one of the things that I've been doing is recognizing that sometimes I need to go to somebody else to get that need met. And I've recognized that sometimes it's the person that I'm trying to get my needs met from, they're not the right fit for that, either because they can't understand or because what I'm dealing with is not normal friend or relationship level stuff. It's deeper. So after my mom died, it was considered a traumatic loss, and I needed support, and I turned to friends for support, but I honestly needed more than anyone could give. I needed more comfort and support and guidance. And honestly, I needed help working through a lot of the stuff it brought up. And so it ultimately meant going to a therapist to talk about that. I don't think any friend could have given me the level of support that I needed in that situation. Other times it's, maybe I'm really excited about something. I'm working on a book or whatever, and I want to talk to somebody about it, but like maybe they're dealing with their own loss or something, and they just aren't in a place where they can be happy for me right now, or they don't have a lot of time to talk and or hear my info dump about how writing a book is going. So, I have a mentor that I talk to who has written a book before and gets it and knows what it's like and can be that support for me in a way that even my closest friends probably couldn't be. In terms of something like working out, I used to count on my partner for that because I'm like, well, I need somebody to like do it with me. And so while I do need the extra motivation and accountability and like body doubling, that doesn't mean I necessarily need it from them. And I was able to get it another way. And that other way for me, at least when it comes to my fitness goals, is Copilot. It's honestly the only thing I've been able to stick with. And I think it's because I have an actual human supporting me, planning my workouts, and checking in when it's been a bit. Darian has been wonderful. I let her know that I'd hurt my wrist, and she sent me a video with modifications I could do, as well as a wrist routine she used to do daily. I tried it out, and it was surprisingly helpful. My wrist is feeling a lot better now. In the meantime, she adjusted my workouts so I could keep doing them without any strain on my wrist. Knowing how to modify my workouts helped me be able to keep doing them safely. I was able to keep up the habit and not have to feel like I was starting all over again. I even leveled up. Every fitness coach I've had with Copilot has been incredibly supportive and helped me stay on track with my workout goals. So I'm not surprised to learn that over 75% of Copilot clients continue to work out after 100 days. And apparently, a lot of them have ADHD. For something as hard to stick to as working out, that's pretty incredible, which is why I keep promoting them. They're also about consistency and the journey, as opposed to immediate results from a program that's impossible to stick to. And they've never once shamed me or pressured me to do more than I was ready for. It's been really nice to go at my pace and get into a regular workout routine without the pressure of looking a certain way at the end of it. My trainer makes it feel like it's about me and really works to understand and meet my needs, even when I feel like my needs aren't that big a deal, which is really nice. If you'd like to join me, click my Copilot link, go.mycopilot.com/howtoadhd to get 14 days free with your own expert fitness and health coach. Now, back to the video. It was such a big thing for me to realize that even if somebody's needs are more important than mine or bigger than mine in this moment, that doesn't mean that mine aren't important too. Just like you can't really measure pain, like, well, I'm going through this grief. Well, I'm going through this grief. Okay, cool. Like my grief doesn't matter then, I guess. Like it's not a comparative thing. Everybody has needs. Everybody goes through stuff and everybody deserves and needs support for that. It really did help to have that language of, I believe your needs are more important in this moment and I don't want to neglect mine. I believe your needs are more important here and I don't want to neglect mine. Since learning that, I've discovered a lot of strategies for doing that. One of the strategies I learned was to, rather than just not get my needs met at all, reschedule it. Like, hey, I want to talk about this thing, but like maybe as I'm processing it, it brings something up for you. And you're not in a place where you can hear me anymore. You're not in a place where you can talk about it. Okay. But like, if that's always happening, either I need to be talking to somebody else, or I can say, hey, like, I get that you're overwhelmed by this in this moment. When can we talk about it? Like, let's let you feel this stuff and then like come back to this. Another way of doing it is saying the original hurt first. So rather than go, whose needs are greater here, who brought it up first? Who's feeling hurt? And if I say, hey, I'm feeling hurt by this, and a friend brings up, well, what about this? I'm hurt about this. We'll get to that. That sounds really important. I brought this to you first. Let's talk about this first. Another way is to honestly recognize that like sometimes we get in patterns in relationships where we are so used to taking care of somebody else and their needs being more important than ours that like the relationship dynamic itself might not be healthy and it might not be a good friendship or relationship to be in. Any friendship that is just completely based on supporting somebody else is probably not healthy, especially for rescuing them. There's supposed to be reciprocity. And so if there's not reciprocity, that's a bad sign. I'm personally a fan of like speaking up about my needs first, because I realize that I do fall into this pattern. I do get to the point where I'm just like, well, my needs don't matter, and I stay quiet about them. And I feel like I'm giving more than I'm getting back all of the time. That's worth looking at. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person. It just means that it's not a reciprocal relationship. It's not something that's benefiting both people. Maybe it's only benefiting them. There is a really great article that I read once about how there are 3 types of people in the world. There's givers, matchers, and takers. And the happiest people in the world are givers. And the least happy people in the world are also givers. Just depends on who they're matched with. If they're matched with takers, givers are going to give, and not get a lot back in return. And so the article suggested that givers, at least at the beginning of a relationship, act as matchers. If you act as a matcher and you give and then you wait for some reciprocity before you give again, then the people who are there just to take probably will go away because they're not getting what they're looking for. It's hard to do, but that's another solution too. Another one is just to look at fit, right? I tell my inner child to come to me and say like what she needs, and then based on what she needs help with, I can direct her to the right person. Because sometimes we're going to the hardware store for oranges and the hardware store doesn't sell oranges. And then we get mad about it, right? And it's like, okay, hey, like I know where you can get oranges. Like, let's go to the grocery store. If you have needs, which if you're human, you do, those needs deserve to get met. And you are the adult in the room and you have every right to meet them. I think that's going to happen. But I think that our needs aren't going to get met as long as they are under the radar. And they don't have to be. They don't have to be under the radar if we speak up about them. As kids, we don't know what we need, maybe. We know that needs aren't getting met, but like we don't have this language yet. We don't have this understanding. We don't have metacognition to think about like where it makes sense to get these needs met. But as adults, we do. We know that we have these needs. They're not under the radar to us, and we can make sure that they're not under the radar to other people either. Even when our needs aren't getting met, it doesn't mean that they're not important. Even when our needs aren't obvious and visible, it doesn't mean they're not important. They are. Otherwise, they wouldn't be needs. This all, of course, assumes that we even know what our needs are. I will link to some resources in the description below as to what human needs tend to be. Wants are different from needs, although getting at least some of our wants met generally is a need. So it can be hard. It can be hard, especially after a lifetime of trying to convince ourselves that we don't even have needs, to know what they even are. So I'll link to some resources in the description below. And if anybody has any other examples they'd like to add of how to get their needs met, even when others are more important, even when ours are flying under the radar, I would love to hear that. You can tell how uncomfortable I am with this topic, but it's good. I'm glad I'm putting it out there because I hope it's helpful for somebody else and I could use the accountability. I guess I'll say one more thing, which is that if you can't meet somebody else's needs, that's okay. We don't always have the capacity to do that. And sometimes in order to meet our own needs, we can't meet somebody else's because we need that energy for ourselves. I think it really just comes down to communication. Because if you can't meet their needs and they're expecting you to, letting them know that you can't is a really good way for them to know that they are going to need to lean on somebody else, and gives them the ability to go get their needs met as opposed to waiting on you. I need some ice cream. Thank you to my brain advocates and all my Patreon brains for telling me that what I'm doing here is important. That definitely fulfills a big need of mine, which is to feel like what I do matters and to have the support that I need to be able to do it. Also food. Food is helpful. Like, subscribe, click all the things, and I will see you next video. Bye, brains. Oh, and if you want to try out Copilot, again, links in the description.